In the middle of a crowded classroom, a black honor student places his test on the teacher's desk, every answer flawless. Instead of applause, the teacher rips it in half and snarls, "Kids like you don't solve problems like this." Gasps ripple through the room, phones start recording, and the boy's future hangs on the edge of a single accusation. But what happens next will shatter every lie they told about him. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The auditorium lights hummed faintly, casting a sterile glow over rows of polished seats packed with anxious families, eager coaches, and sharp-eyed competitors. A low murmur filled the space, the kind that hovers before something decisive. At the center of it all, 17-year-old Caleb Johnson sat at his desk, pen poised above the sheet of paper that carried the weight of his future. His hands were steady, but his mind moved like fire. This was no ordinary test. It was the State Mathematics Invitational, the kind of event that launched scholarships, head goals, and lifelong reputations. For Caleb, the stakes were even higher. He wasn't just another competitor. He was a black kid from the East Side, raised by a single mother who cleaned offices at night and stocked shelves in the morning. Every eye seemed to watch him differently, as though waiting for him to stumble, to prove he didn't belong in the rarefied air of prodigies. The problem before him had been whispered about all season. Unsolvable, some claimed. A proof tangled in layers of logic that even seasoned professors hesitated to attempt under pressure. Yet Caleb, with his quiet intensity, leaned forward. The auditorium noise faded into a dull hum. He didn't see the rows of spectators. He saw only the elegant rhythm of numbers. His pen scratched across the page with a speed that startled even himself. What others saw as chaos, Caleb saw as a pattern unfolding, a truth waiting to be revealed. Step by step, line by line, the problem began to dissolve in his hand. Within minutes, he had constructed a solution so clean, so precise, that it almost looked rehearsed. And then silence. The kind of silence that wasn't awe but suspicion. At first one person clapped, then stopped, looking sideways. Heads tilted, whispers curled through the audience like smoke. Did he really just? There's no way he got that so fast. Impossible. He must have had the answer beforehand. Caleb looked up, chest rising and falling with quiet triumph, expecting at least one approving nod. Instead, he saw narrowed eyes, skepticism, doubt. From the front row, Mr. Whitman, his school's math teacher and one of the supervising officials, stood abruptly. His sharp suit and neatly parted hair gave him a presence of authority, but his voice carried something colder. "Caleb," he said loudly, cutting through the whispers, "I'll need you to stop right there." The crowd hushed instantly. Caleb froze, pen still in his hand. "You solved that problem," Whitman continued, pacing closer, "in under 10 minutes. Problems of this nature aren't just difficult. They're designed to take the brightest students at least an hour to even attempt. So tell us, Caleb, how exactly did you come by your answer?" The words hung heavy in the air. They weren't an inquiry. They were an accusation. Caleb's throat tightened. I worked it out," he managed, voice low but steady. "Step by step, just like anyone else." A scoff rippled through the front rows. Whitman's lip curled slightly. "Worked it out? Don't insult everyone here. You expect us to believe that a high school student—" He paused, letting the emphasis sharpen the knife, especially one with no formal advanced coursework, just happened to discover a method professors have struggled with for years. Caleb's cheeks burned. He wanted to argue, to explain that he had practiced endlessly at night, that numbers came to him like music. But the weight of 100 skeptical eyes pressed down on him. From the back of the auditorium, Denise Johnson clutched the edge of her seat. She knew this look, this tone. She had lived it in job interviews, in stores where security followed her, in hospitals where her concerns were dismissed. And now, watching her son's proudest moment twist into public humiliation, her stomach churned. Caleb tried again. "I didn't cheat. I swear." "You can check?" Whitman snapped. "Oh, we will." "Judges," he turned to the long table where 3 officials sat stiffly. "I formally challenge this submission. His work must be confiscated and examined immediately." A collective gasp echoed. The judges exchanged uncertain glances. One of them, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose, leaned into her microphone. "Mr. Whitman, we haven't even reviewed his paper yet. And if you don't," Whitman cut in, You risk letting this entire competition become a farce. Rules exist for a reason. If this boy is allowed to turn in work of suspicious origin, without scrutiny, what does that say about the integrity of this event? Caleb flinched at the word boy. He wasn't blind to the subtext, the way Whitman's voice sharpened when directed at him in particular. The audience stirred with low murmurs again. Some nodded in agreement. Others frowned uncomfortably, but no one spoke up directly in Caleb's defense. "Hand over your paper," Whitman demanded, extending his hand, palm stiff and expectant. Caleb's knuckles whitened around the pen. His heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to hold on, to refuse to stand tall in the face of what felt like open sabotage. Yet he could feel the judge's eyes, the audience's whispers, his mother's gaze boring into his back. "Mr. Johnson," one of the judges finally said, voice measured but firm, "please surrender your test paper for review." The auditorium fell completely silent. Even the hum of the lights seemed to fade. Caleb's breath caught in his chest. If he gave it up, would they believe him? Or would this be the moment his genius was buried under suspicion forever? And just as his trembling hand inched toward the paper, a sharp voice rang out from the audience, one that no one expected. The judges demand Caleb hand over his test paper as evidence, while the room goes silent when suddenly, an unexpected voice interrupts, shifting the entire direction of the moment. The silence in the auditorium seemed to stretch into eternity. Caleb's hand trembled over his paper as Whitman's demand echoed. But before his fingers could release the sheet, the sound of a cough, sharp and deliberate, pulled him backward in time. The auditorium faded. Suddenly he was back in the dim glow of his bedroom lamp. Years earlier, the air heavy with the scent of laundry detergent, and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Caleb was 10 years old then, hunched over a torn notebook that had once been his mother's grocery ledger. The lined pages bore faint traces of prices and shopping lists beneath his scrawled equations. Numbers spilled across the margins, not as chores but as companions, constant, reliable, obedient to rules he could master when the rest of life felt uncertain. The apartment they lived in was small. A third-floor walk-up with peeling paint and a landlord who never fixed the heating. Winters were brutal. Caleb often wore his coat indoors as he scribbled away by the dim light. His mother, Denise Johnson, worked long hours at a downtown hotel as a maid, and picked up overnight shifts at a 24-hour convenience store. She'd tiptoe in around dawn, her uniform smelling faintly of bleach, her face lined with exhaustion. Still, she'd always peek into his room. "Baby, you're still awake?" she'd whisper. And Caleb, with circles under his eyes but a grin bright as morning, would answer, "I just had to finish this one problem, Mama. I think I almost cracked it." For Denise, those words were both a balm and a burden. She wanted to nurture his brilliance but feared the world that had never been kind to boys like him. At school, the walls closed in tighter. In 4th grade, when Caleb solved multiplication problems faster than his teacher could write them, the response wasn't pride, but suspicion. "Slow down, Caleb," the teacher had said once, frowning. "It's not a race. Let's make sure you're not just guessing." By middle school, the pattern grew harsher. A math instructor dismissed him during class, saying, "Kids like you usually do better in sports. Why don't you focus there?" The sting of those words lodged deep in his chest. He didn't argue, he just sharpened his pencil and worked harder in silence. Late nights became his sanctuary. With Denise often away, the apartment transformed into his private universe of equations. He'd scavenge scratch paper from anywhere. Old envelopes, church bulletins, even receipts from the convenience store where his mother worked, each piece filled with loops of fractions, long divisions, and later, complex algebraic patterns. The world outside might have doubted him, but the numbers never did. And still, recognition didn't come easily. When he entered his first local math contest at 13, the judges eyed him skeptically. He remembered overhearing 2 officials mutter, "That Johnson kid, never heard of him. Probably got lucky." But when the results came in, Caleb had not only won, he had finished a full round ahead of every other student. No one clapped as loudly for him as they had for the second-place finisher, a white boy from the wealthier suburbs. Even in victory, Caleb felt invisible. Denise noticed. She squeezed his shoulder as they walked home that evening. "Doesn't matter if they clap, baby," she told him softly. "You showed them what you're capable of. That's worth more than applause." But Caleb couldn't shake the ache of being overlooked, the nagging suspicion that in their eyes, his achievements always needed an asterisk. High school didn't make it easier. By then his reputation as a quiet math genius had spread. But so had the doubt. Some teachers admired his ability. Others brushed it off as if he were some curiosity. A guidance counselor once told Denise in a hushed tone, "Maybe don't push him toward advanced mathematics. It's very competitive, and students from his background rarely succeed there." Denise had clenched her jaw. "From his background?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "You mean because he's black? Or because his mama cleans hotel floors? Either way, you're wrong. He's going to succeed whether you believe it or not." That night she came home and told Caleb nothing about the counselor's words. Instead, she sat with him as he worked, quietly folding laundry nearby, offering the silent support of a mother who refused to let her son carry her anger. Despite the bias, Caleb kept entering contests. Some he won, some he lost, but each time he proved to himself that brilliance wasn't reserved for the privileged. By 15 he was solving problems 2 grade levels ahead. By 16 he was tackling university-level material with ease. Yet with each milestone, whispers of disbelief shadowed his achievements. Did he copy that? Somebody must be helping him. Maybe he found the solutions online. The more Caleb succeeded, the more the doubts followed, circling like vultures. One night, worn from another competition where his victory earned only side glances, Caleb sat by the window of the apartment, staring out at the streetlights. "Mama," he said quietly, "do you think I'll ever do something big enough that they can't ignore it?" Denise walked over, pressing a hand to his cheek. "Baby, they'll always try to ignore it. But you," she tapped his forehead gently, "you don't shine for them. You shine because God made you too. Don't you forget that." Her words steadied him, but deep inside, he longed for more than survival. He longed for recognition that couldn't be stripped away by bias or whispered doubt. And just when it seemed he might drown in that yearning, fate intervened. It happened on a chilly autumn afternoon, just after his latest contest. Caleb had lingered behind as the auditorium emptied, stuffing his notes into his backpack. A woman approached the judge's table, her cane clicking softly against the floor. She was older, her hair a crown of silver curls, her presence dignified but warm. She watched Caleb closely, her sharp eyes narrowing not in suspicion, but in understanding. "You solved that last problem differently than I've ever seen," she said. Her voice carried both authority and curiosity. Caleb blinked, unsure if he was being mocked again. I just worked it out," he murmured. The woman smiled faintly. "No, you didn't just work it out. You created something new. That's not common." She extended a hand. "I'm Professor Eleanor Brooks. Once upon a time I was where you are now." Caleb hesitated before shaking her hand. There was something in her eyes, a recognition, a weight that made his chest tighten. He had no idea then that meeting her would change everything. The mysterious woman, Professor Eleanor Brooks, a retired black mathematician, enters Caleb's life, hinting that the battles he faces have been fought before, and that new challenges are only beginning. Professor Eleanor Brooks's words still echoed in Caleb's mind long after that first meeting. For the first time, someone had seen him not as a fluke, not as an anomaly, but as a mathematician in his own right. She began to mentor him quietly, meeting him at the library after her morning walks, sliding books across the table that stretched his thinking further than he'd ever imagined. But recognition, however small, rarely came without consequences. At Westbrook High, Caleb's victories in local math contests began to draw whispers in the hallways. Students who had barely noticed him before now seemed to watch his every move. He was invited onto the school's math team, a position many assumed would automatically belong to Tyler Crane. Tyler was everything Caleb was not. Tall, blonde, confident in a way that came from knowing the world had been built to catch him, if he fell. His father was a prominent attorney, his mother a university trustee. Their family name opened doors before Tyler even knocked. Teachers described him as gifted, polished, the golden boy of Westbrook. When Caleb joined the math team, Tyler's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed. It was the kind of smile that said, "This is temporary. You don't belong here." At first the rivalry was quiet, almost invisible. Tyler would lean over Caleb's shoulder during practice sessions, pretending to admire his work, then mutter just loud enough for others to hear, "Funny how you always have the answers." Almost like someone gave them to you beforehand. Some students chuckled nervously. No one corrected him. The whispers spread. By the end of the semester, Caleb noticed classmates watching him with narrowed eyes, quick to assume luck or dishonesty rather than genius. He worked harder, hoping results would silence the noise, but every win only fueled suspicion. During one regional meet, Caleb finished a problem so quickly that even the proctor seemed stunned. Tyler was standing nearby when he smirked and said, "You should at least pretend to think. Makes it less obvious." The proctor didn't laugh, but the seed was planted. Later, when scores were posted, Caleb overheard two teachers debating softly. "Unbelievable. A sophomore outscoring seniors? Or maybe too unbelievable." Caleb's stomach dropped. He knew exactly what they meant. Denise noticed the change in her son. His victories left him quieter, not louder. "Baby, what's wrong?" she asked one night, as she folded laundry on the couch. Caleb shrugged. "It doesn't matter how hard I work. They'll never believe it's me. They think I'm cheating. They think I don't belong." Denise reached for his hand. "Listen to me, Caleb. People doubt what they don't understand. And some people," she paused, weighing her words carefully, "some people see your skin before they see your gift. That's their blindness, not yours." But her reassurance couldn't erase the look in his teacher's eyes, or the quiet laughter in the hallways. Tyler, meanwhile, mastered the art of the backhanded compliment. In front of teachers, he'd say things like, "Caleb's so good, maybe too good, almost like he's memorized the answers." Or, "Man, I wish I had a secret tutor like Caleb does." There was never evidence, only insinuation. And in a world already primed to doubt Caleb, insinuation was enough. Even the math team coach, Mr. Whitman, seemed swayed. During one practice, after Caleb completed another near-perfect run, Whitman leaned back in his chair. "Caleb, it's impressive, but remember, mathematics is about process, not shortcuts. Make sure you're not rushing in ways that might raise eyebrows." The words landed like a stone. Shortcuts. Raised eyebrows. He wasn't being praised. He was being warned. By junior year, the rivalry was no longer subtle. Tyler openly framed himself as the rightful heir to the math team's spotlight, dropping Caleb's name in conversations with staff, hinting that things didn't add up. His family's influence only magnified his voice. Teachers who once dismissed Caleb with indifference now eyed him with suspicion, while Tyler was celebrated for every minor achievement. And yet, the contradiction was cruel. Outside of Westbrook's halls, Caleb was earning real recognition. Local math fairs, statewide problem-solving contests. He kept winning. Small articles appeared in community papers. Local student shocks judges with innovative proof. Photos of him with medals circulated, though they never made it onto the school's bulletin board. Admired in one space, erased in another. At school assemblies, Caleb noticed the applause was always louder for Tyler. In classrooms, when Caleb raised his hand, teachers hesitated before calling on him, often defaulting to Tyler instead. Even peers who congratulated him in private seemed reluctant to defend him in public. He was admired, yes, but admired at a distance. The weight of isolation pressed heavier than the bias itself. Genius had made him visible, but racism ensured he would never be embraced. By the spring of his junior year, the tension reached its breaking point. The state championship was approaching, the biggest academic stage Caleb had ever faced. He trained obsessively, filling notebook after notebook under Professor Brooks's guidance. She reminded him of her own battles decades earlier, how her brilliance had been dismissed in lecture halls where she was the only black woman. "They'll doubt you because they doubted me," she said one evening, adjusting her glasses as they sat in the library. "But numbers don't care about color, and in the end, neither will history." Caleb nodded, though he wasn't sure if history would ever give him the chance. On the morning of the championship, the air buzzed with anticipation. Students crowded into the lobby, checking lists posted on the wall. Denise stood nearby, her hands trembling around a worn handbag. She prayed silently, hoping today would finally bring her son the respect he deserved. Caleb pushed through the crowd, eyes scanning the list. His heart pounded as he traced the names: Tyler Crane, Melissa Grant, Jordan Ellis, one by one, until his name wasn't there. He blinked, certain he'd missed it. He scanned again. Nothing. Behind him, Tyler stepped forward, hands casually tucked into his pockets. He leaned close enough for only Caleb to hear. "Tough break. Guess they finally realized you didn't belong." And then Tyler smirked, broad, triumphant, as Caleb's stomach dropped. The list was final, and somehow, without explanation, he had been erased. At the state championship, Caleb's name has been removed from the finalist list, and Tyler Crane's smirks, savoring his quiet victory, leaving Caleb stunned and betrayed. The list of names on the championship wall burned in Caleb's mind long after he walked out of the lobby. No matter how many times he replayed it, no matter how many times he scanned the rows in his memory, his name was absent. He could still hear Tyler's low chuckle, that smug whisper. They finally realized you didn't belong. At first, Caleb thought it was a clerical mistake. Maybe his paperwork hadn't gone through. Maybe someone had forgotten to update the list. He tried to believe in error, because believing in intent was too painful. But a week later, he overheard two teachers in the hallway, their voices low but not low enough. The board said they had to be careful. Careful? About what? Well, you heard the rumors. No one solves problems that fast without outside help. The words hit him harder than any punch could have. This wasn't an error. This was suspicion codified into policy. That night, he told Denise everything. She was furious. They investigated you? She demanded, pacing their small living room. Her hands shook as she clutched the pay stub she had just brought home, the corners crumpling under her grip. Without even telling us? Without a chance to defend yourself? Caleb sat slouched on the couch, staring at the floor. They don't think I'm smart enough. They think I'm cheating. Denise's voice cracked. No, baby. They don't want to admit a black boy from the east side is smarter than all their golden children. That's what this is. The next morning, Denise marched down to the school office. She demanded a meeting with the competition organizers, but her request was brushed off. Mrs. Johnson, one of the administrators said, with a polite but icy smile, we understand your concern, but you must understand ours. When there are irregularities, it's our duty to investigate. Please don't overreact. Denise's breath caught. Overreact? Her voice wavered between anger and disbelief. You erased my son without telling us you whispered about him behind closed doors. And now you're telling me I'm overreacting? The administrator adjusted his glasses and offered the same smile. We have to ensure fairness for everyone. I'm sure you understand. It wasn't fairness. It was dismissal. Denise left the office shaking, her eyes burning with unshed tears. That evening she sat Caleb down and tried to explain gently what she had learned. But before she could, Professor Brooks arrived. She had heard whispers herself, and she wasted no time with niceties. They didn't just doubt you, Caleb, she said, lowering herself into the worn armchair across from him. They moved against you. Quietly. That's how systemic racism works. It doesn't always shout in your face. Sometimes it whispers in boardrooms, in emails, in so-called investigations, and by the time you realize it's already written you out. Caleb listened, his jaw tight. He wanted to believe Brooks was wrong, that this was just an unfortunate misunderstanding, but the look in her eyes, calm, weary, certain, told him she'd lived this before. When I was your age, she continued, I solved problems my professors couldn't. Instead of recognition, they said I must have copied. They didn't imagine someone who looked like me could create new methods. I watched opportunities vanish, scholarships rerouted, and every time I spoke up, I was told I was imagining it. Caleb leaned forward, his voice small. So there's nothing I can do? Brooks shook her head slowly. There's always something you can do. But you have to understand, this fight isn't just about proving your intelligence. It's about pushing against a system that's been built to doubt you from the start. Denise reached for Caleb's hand. Baby, listen to her. You've got a gift, but the world won't hand you anything. They'll make you fight twice as hard for half the recognition. The words stung. He didn't want to fight twice as hard. He wanted fairness. He wanted to compete on equal ground. But as he sat between his mother's steady grip and Brooks's steady gaze, something hardened inside him. He thought about the long nights at his desk, the pages upon pages of proofs no one had seen. He thought about Tyler, about the smirk that seemed to haunt every quiet moment. And he thought about the board, faceless, powerful, dismissing him, without a chance to speak. The more he thought, the more a quiet fire began to burn. That night, long after Denise had fallen asleep, Caleb pulled his notebooks back onto the desk. He spread them open, running his fingers over the ink-stained pages. He whispered to himself, barely audible, they won't erase me. Not again. From then on, his routine shifted. School became a blur of half-heard lectures and ignored whispers. His real focus came at night, under the weak light of his desk lamp, where he dove into textbooks borrowed from the library and advanced materials Brooks slipped into his hands. While Tyler basked in celebration, plastered across newsletters and posters as Westbrook's champion. Caleb worked in silence. He pushed beyond the problems given to him, inventing challenges of his own. He sketched solutions on the backs of grocery receipts, calculated equations in the margins of church bulletins, and tested theories on scrap paper pulled from the trash. It was lonely work, isolating work, but it was also liberating. Here, in the shadows, no one could doubt him. No one could interrupt him with accusations. One evening, as he cracked a particularly stubborn problem, Brooks leaned over his shoulder. Her eyes widened. "You've just done in 5 lines what most mathematicians would take a page to prove," she murmured. "Caleb, do you realize what you're building here?" He shook his head, too focused to notice the awe in her tone. "You're not just solving problems," she said softly. "You're creating mathematics. That's something few people ever do." The words steadied him. They gave him something the competitions couldn't. The knowledge that his genius was real, undeniable, whether others recognized it or not. And yet outside his small circle, the narrative hardened. Tyler Crane was Westbrook's chosen star, the right fit for the national stage. Caleb Johnson was barely a whisper, his erasure all but complete. But Caleb wasn't done. Not by a long shot. Late one night, staring at the neat rows of equations in his notebook, he made a quiet vow. "If they won't give me a stage, I'll build one of my own. If they won't let me compete, I'll compete anyway." His hand gripped the pen tighter, his jaw set. He wouldn't quit, not this time. And as he turned the page to begin again, a notification buzzed on his mother's old phone lying beside him. A headline lit the screen, bright in the dark. Caleb leaned over, squinting at the words. His breath caught. Caleb, determined not to quit, began secretly preparing for the national exam on his own. But just as his resolve hardens, a headline flashes across the screen with news that will change everything. The sting of betrayal still burned long after Caleb's name had been erased from the state championship list. He replayed the moment in his mind. Tyler's smirk, the whispers in the lobby, his mother's trembling hand. It wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure, as if his work, his victories, his very presence had never existed. For days afterward, Caleb walked the halls of Westbrook High like a ghost. No one asked what had happened. No one protested. The absence of his name on the championship roster was accepted as fact, as though it confirmed what many had suspected all along, that his brilliance had been a trick, a misunderstanding, something unworthy of recognition. But Caleb refused to vanish. Late nights found him hunched once again, over his notebooks, pages littered with complex symbols and proofs. His bedroom floor became a graveyard of crumpled paper. The little desk lamp, cracked at the base, cast long shadows across his determined face. Denise often returned from her shift at the hotel to find him asleep at the desk, pen still in hand, equations trailing off midline. Professor Brooks noticed the change. Instead of discouragement, Caleb was burning with a sharper, harder resolve. "They'll never believe me," he admitted one evening, his voice low as they sat across from each other in the library. "Even if I win, they'll find a way to say I cheated." Brooks studied him, her lined face etched with empathy and experience. "Then stop playing their game," she said softly. "Stop trying to prove you're as good as they are. Show them you're beyond what they can measure." Her words landed deep. From that night on, Caleb's study sessions took on a new intensity. He stopped relying solely on standard methods and began experimenting with his own approaches, shortcuts, restructured logic, patterns that others hadn't noticed. What began as curiosity quickly evolved into something more, a personal mathematical language that carried his signature in every line. One evening, after watching him unravel a particularly dense problem in half the expected steps, Brooks leaned back in astonishment. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" she asked. Caleb looked up, puzzled. "Just solved it." "No," she said firmly. "You didn't just solve it. You built a bridge no one else thought to build. That's not imitation, Caleb. That's invention." The word clung to him. Invention. For once he allowed himself to smile. But invention, however brilliant, did not erase invisibility. While Caleb pushed himself to new heights, the world outside Westbrook went on without him. His victories in smaller contests remained confined to local newspapers, rarely celebrated beyond his neighborhood. His innovations stayed in notebooks no one asked to read. At school, Tyler Crane's spotlight only grew brighter. Teachers praised him as a model student, while Caleb's absence from the championship was quietly rationalized. "Rules are rules," one administrator told Denise, when she questioned why her son hadn't been reinstated. We can't accommodate uncertainties. The pause before that final word revealed everything. Denise returned home that night and found Caleb scribbling furiously at his desk. She wanted to tell him to rest, to protect himself, but when she saw the light in his eyes, she stopped. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "They don't see you," she said softly. "But I do. Don't let their blindness dim your light." Caleb nodded, but the fire in him wasn't for validation anymore. It was for mastery. Weeks passed. His notebooks multiplied. Each page carried new methods, some so efficient they startled even him. Brooks, now more mentor than teacher, began to collect his work, insisting he date every discovery. "One day," she told him, "these pages will be the proof no one can deny." Yet proof required opportunity, and opportunity was what Caleb had been denied. The spring air carried whispers of the upcoming national competition, the pinnacle of high school mathematics, where the best minds from across the country would face off. It was the kind of event that could transform a prodigy into a household name. Caleb didn't dare dream of being there. He'd already been erased once. Why invite more heartbreak? But fate had a cruel way of rubbing salt in wounds. On a Friday morning, as Caleb sat in algebra class, scribbling formulas into the margin of his notebook, the loudspeaker crackled to life. The principal's voice rang through the room. "Congratulations to Tyler Crane, who has been selected to represent Westbrook High at this year's National Mathematics Championship. Tyler's consistent excellence has made our school proud, and we look forward to his continued success on the national stage." The classroom erupted in applause. Tyler leaned back in his chair, basking in the attention, eyes flicking toward Caleb with deliberate triumph. Caleb's hand froze mid-equation. The pen dug into the paper until the tip snapped. Around him, students clapped, some glancing at him with expressions that mingled pity and satisfaction. He forced himself to stare at his broken pen, not at Tyler's smirk. When the announcement ended, Tyler stretched lazily and turned in his seat. "Guess hard work pays off," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Or maybe it's just being the right fit." The word struck deeper than the smirk. The right fit. It was what Caleb had always known. No matter how brilliant he became, the system was built to favor someone else. That afternoon, Denise tried to comfort him, but her voice trembled with anger. "They can't erase you forever, Caleb. One day they'll regret this." But Caleb only shook his head. "Maybe they won't. Maybe I'll just disappear." Brooks, however, refused to let him spiral. She pressed a folder of his latest solutions into his hands. "Disappear?" she said firmly. "Not when you're writing mathematics that could change the field. You're not vanishing, Caleb. You're becoming undeniable." Yet as the news spread across town, articles, school announcements, congratulatory posters, with Tyler's face, Caleb felt smaller than ever. His genius was alive, but it lived in shadows, while the world celebrated someone else. And then, just as he resolved to bury himself deeper in study, a new headline appeared that week, a headline that made Caleb stop cold. News breaks that Tyler Crane has been officially chosen to represent the school at the national level. His face plastered everywhere, while Caleb, unacknowledged, unseen, realizes his erasure is nearly complete. The glow of the cracked phone screen still lingered in Caleb's mind. He had seen the headline announcing Tyler Crane's selection for the national competition. It wasn't enough that Caleb's name had been erased. Now Tyler's triumph was being broadcast everywhere, celebrated as if he were the only prodigy Westbrook had ever known. At first, Caleb thought it would fade. Local news cycles came and went quickly, and Tyler's victory, though painful, might pass without much more attention. But the Crane family didn't let it. Within hours of the announcement, Tyler's face was plastered across the school's website, the district's newsletter, even the local paper. Headlines called him Westbrook's brightest star, the golden mind of math, and our champion. And then came the posts. Tyler had always been polished in public, careful to play the role of the charming prodigy. But online, where words could be sharpened into weapons, his mask slipped. One night, Caleb scrolled through social media and froze at what he saw. On Tyler's account, a picture of a calculator sat next to a caption, "Some people need one of these. Others just need the answer key. Guess which one Caleb is?" The comments poured in. "LMAO, he really cheated? Knew it. No way that kid was legit. Fraud Johnson strikes again." Within hours, the post spread beyond Westbrook. Strangers, people Caleb had never met, were sharing it, tagging him, turning his name into a punchline. Memes followed. Images of calculators with his face photoshopped onto them. Fake cheating for dummies book covers with his name on the front. Hashtags began trending locally. Non-fake genius. Calculator Caleb. Fraud Johnson. Each time Caleb refreshed his phone, the weight on his chest grew heavier. It wasn't just doubt anymore. It was ridicule. Public and merciless. Denise saw the posts too. One evening, as she arrived home from her shift, she found Caleb sitting silently at the kitchen table, the phone screen glowing in his hand. His shoulders were hunched, his face pale in the dim light. "Baby," she whispered, pulling the phone gently from him. She scrolled through the cruel words, her heart breaking with each one. "Don't look at this mess. These people don't know you. They don't know your work." Caleb shook his head. His voice was hollow. "But they believe it. That's enough." Denise cupped his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "Listen to me. You cannot let them write your story. You hear me? They'll try to drag you down because they can't reach where you are. But you're my son. You're not their lies." Caleb wanted to believe her. He wanted her strength to be enough. But the comments echoed in his mind at night, louder than her reassurances. Fraud. Fake. Cheat. School became unbearable. Students shared the memes on their phones during class, snickering just loud enough for him to hear. A group in the cafeteria started chanting, "Answer key," as he passed. Even teachers looked at him differently, hesitant, cautious, as though his brilliance had been permanently tainted. Professor Brooks noticed the slump in his posture, the way he avoided eye contact. One afternoon, she closed the book they'd been studying and leaned across the table. "They're not laughing because you failed," she said firmly. "They're laughing because you succeeded in ways they can't understand. And when people can't understand you, they fear you. Fear makes them cruel." Caleb swallowed hard. "Then what am I supposed to do? Just stay quiet while the whole world calls me a fraud?" Brooks held his gaze. "No. You let your work speak. Louder than words. Louder than rumors. You don't fight them with anger. You fight them with brilliance." That night, Caleb made a decision. He would not respond to Tyler online. He would not defend himself in the comments section. Instead, he returned to his notebooks with renewed purpose. Each problem solved became an act of defiance. Each new method an answer no one could erase. Still, the ridicule didn't stop. It grew. A local news station ran a feature on Tyler's upcoming appearance at the national competition, framing him as the lone prodigy of Westbrook. Caleb wasn't mentioned at all. When Denise called the station to ask why, the producer dismissed her curtly. "We don't cover students with unresolved integrity concerns." Unresolved integrity concerns. The phrase replayed in Caleb's head like a curse. The cruel irony was clear. He had never been given a chance to defend himself, yet the accusation alone was enough to tarnish him publicly. One Friday afternoon, as he sat in the library with Brooks, a group of students walked by, laughing. One of them muttered just loud enough for Caleb to hear, "Hey, don't leave your answers lying around. Fraud Johnson might steal them." Caleb's pen snapped in his hand. Brooks placed her hand gently on his arm. "Don't give them the satisfaction," she whispered. But Caleb's silence came with a vow. He would not let Tyler Crane or anyone else define him as a fraud. If they thought they had buried him, they were wrong. He would rise, not with words but with proof. And then when it seemed the ridicule might consume him entirely, the unexpected happened. One night, as Caleb sat at his desk, his mother's old phone buzzed with a new message. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another cruel meme, another stranger's sneer. But the subject line caught his eye. "Opportunity awaits. Confidential." He hesitated, then opened it. The message was brief. No name, no details, only an offer. "We've been following your work. You deserve the stage they denied you. A slot has opened at the National Mathematics Championship. If you're willing, it's yours. No conditions, no tricks. But you must decide quickly." Caleb's eyes widened. His pulse quickened. For a moment the noise of the world, the laughter, the whispers, the hashtags faded into silence. An anonymous sponsor offers Caleb a slot in the national competition, if he dares to take it. Caleb stared at the email again, and again, as if the words might dissolve into dust if he blinked too long. "A slot has opened at the National Mathematics Championship. If you're willing, it's yours. No signature, no explanation." When he showed Denise, her first instinct was suspicion. "Baby, this looks too good to be true," she said. clutching her robe tighter around her as if to shield herself from the possibility. What if it's a trap? What if they're setting you up to humiliate you again? Caleb shook his head. His voice was quiet, but steady. Mama, I can't ignore this. They've tried to erase me every step of the way. If this is my chance to prove them wrong, I have to take it. Professor Brooks, who had joined them that evening, studied the email closely. Her face betrayed no excitement, only calculation. Opportunities like this don't come without risks, she murmured. But if this is real, Caleb, this could be the stage they never wanted you to have. Denise sighed, torn between fear and faith. Then you'd better be ready. If you go, you walk in there prepared for every eye to be on you and not kindly. The decision was made. Caleb accepted. The day of the national championship arrived like a storm cloud. The venue was grander than anything Caleb had ever seen. A sprawling auditorium lined with banners from across the country. Bright lights trained on a stage where the nation's top students would battle not with fists, but with mind. As Caleb entered, escorted by Brooks and Denise, the room shifted. Whispers slithered through the crowd. Heads turned, fingers pointed. That's him. The cheater. They actually let him in? It was as though the memes and hashtags had crawled out of the internet and taken human form, filling every corner of the hall with doubt. Caleb's chest tightened, but he forced his feet forward. When the announcer introduced him as a special wildcard entrant, the murmurs grew louder. Unlike the polished introductions for the other students, Tyler Crane among them, smiling like a prince, Caleb's name was delivered with hesitation, almost like an afterthought. On stage, he took his seat. Tyler, positioned just 2 rows over, leaned back and smirked, mouthing the words, "Fraud Johnson." Caleb didn't flinch. The first round began. Problems appeared on large screens, each one designed to challenge even the brightest prodigies. Caleb bent over his paper, pen moving carefully. His hands trembled at first, not from lack of knowledge, but from the weight of all the eyes pressing down on him. The first few problems went smoothly. He breathed easier, his rhythm returning, but as the rounds grew harder, his mind began to stumble. Not because he didn't know, but because doubt had slithered inside. Every time he paused, he could feel the whispers. See? He doesn't belong. See? He's nothing special. For the first time in his life, the numbers blurred. Equations tangled in his mind like threads knotted together. He rubbed his temple, panic rising. From the audience, Denise clenched her hands together, whispering prayers. Brooks leaned forward in her seat, eyes sharp, willing him to remember who he was. Then came the 5th round. A question appeared on the screen that made the audience gasp. Even the judges exchanged stunned glances. It was a problem notorious in academic circles, an equation so complex it was considered unsolvable in the time allowed. No competitor had ever cracked it live. The screen itself seemed to mock them. A wall of symbols, intricate and impenetrable. Caleb froze. His pen hovered above the page. Around him, contestants scribbled furiously, though many gave up within minutes, their faces pale with frustration. Tyler leaned back, pretending to work, then glanced at Caleb with a grin that said, "This is where you break." And for a moment, Caleb believed it. His chest tightened. His breath came shallow. The whispers grew louder. Fraud, cheater, fake. His vision blurred with panic. But then he remembered, nights at his desk. Scrap paper filled with experiments. Brooks's voice telling him he wasn't imitating. He was inventing. Denise's hand on his cheek, reminding him not to shine for them, but for himself. He closed his eyes, blocked out the noise. In the silence of his mind, the problem stopped looking impossible. Patterns emerged. Connections only he could see, born of the methods he had built in the shadows. His pen touched the page. Slowly at first, then faster, lines unfolding with a rhythm that felt like music. He wasn't solving the problem the way textbooks taught. He was solving it his way. Step by step, layer by layer, the impossible began to unravel. Minutes passed. Around him, contestants had abandoned the problem, scribbling guesses or staring blankly. Judges leaned forward, noticing the rapid, confident strokes on Caleb's paper. The murmurs shifted from ridicule to uneasy silence. And then it was done. Caleb dropped his pen, chest heaving. He had written a clean, elegant solution that fit neatly within the lines of the page. No wasted steps, no hesitation. A proof that should have been impossible, captured in less than 20 minutes. The judges stared at his paper, their eyes wide. One whispered to the other, This, this is correct. The silence in the hall deepened, charged now with disbelief. From the audience, Denise's eyes filled with tears. Brooks's lips curved into the faintest, proudest smile. But the crowd did not cheer. Instead, a new whisper began to spread, colder than before. He cheated again. No one solves that problem. Not Lev. This is a setup. The victory that should have crowned him instead placed him under sharper suspicion. Caleb lifted his head. For the first time that day, he allowed himself to look directly at the crowd. His eyes did not waver. He had done what no one else could. Whether they believed it or not no longer mattered. But the judges weren't finished. They rose from their table, conferring in hushed tones. Their faces were grim. Finally, the head judge turned to the microphone. Caleb Johnson's solution will be reviewed for authenticity. Until then, his result is withheld. Gasps echoed through the hall. Caleb's stomach dropped. He had just accomplished the impossible, and once again he was branded suspect. And from across the stage, Tyler Crane leaned back in his chair and smiled, as if he'd known this moment was inevitable. Caleb has solved the impossible problem live, stunning even the judges, but instead of applause, they announce his solution will be investigated for authenticity, casting suspicion over him once again. The air in the auditorium was electric, but not with celebration. The silence after Caleb's impossible solution had a sharpness to it, like glass about to crack. He had just done the unthinkable, unraveling a problem no one else had solved under the pressure of live competition. Yet instead of applause, suspicion filled the space. The head judge's words lingered in the air. Caleb Johnson's solution will be reviewed for authenticity. Until then, his result is withheld. Caleb's chest tightened. He could feel the weight of every gaze pressing down on him. Denise gripped the edge of her seat so hard her knuckles whitened, while Professor Brooks leaned forward, her eyes narrowing in quiet fury. From his seat, Tyler Crane tilted his head, lips curled in satisfaction. He didn't have to speak. The smugness in his expression screamed, I told you so. Within minutes, murmurs swelled into a hum, then into full conversations. He couldn't have done it. Statistically impossible. It has to be a trick. The judges shuffled papers, their whispers urgent. The atmosphere was shifting. Caleb wasn't being treated like a competitor anymore. He was being treated like a suspect. Then, the announcement came. A stern-faced official stepped up to the microphone, her tone clipped and cold. Ladies and gentlemen, after consulting with the board, we have decided to place Caleb Johnson's performance under immediate review. There appear to be statistical irregularities that warrant further investigation. The word hung heavy in the air. Irregularities. Caleb froze. He wanted to stand, to demand an explanation, but his body wouldn't move. The audience reacted instantly. Gasps, murmurs, whispers that grew louder with each passing second. Phones lit up as people texted, recorded, and posted. Denise shot to her feet. Irregularities? She shouted from the audience. My son solved the problem in front of your eyes. You can't take that from him. An usher hurried toward her, murmuring for her to sit down, but her voice carried across the auditorium anyway. This isn't about fairness. This is about you not wanting a black boy to outshine the rest. The crowd stirred uncomfortably. Some nodded, others shook their heads, but most remained silent. Silence. Always silence in the face of injustice. Back on stage, Caleb lowered his eyes to the desk. His hands shook. For the first time, doubt threatened to crack through his defiance. Later that evening, as the competition broke for recess, Caleb sat in the green room with Brooks and Denise. His mother's anger spilled out in sharp whispers. They're trying to break you, Caleb. That's all this is. They can't stand that you're smarter than their golden boy. So they twist the rules. Call it irregular. Call it suspicious. Anything to erase you. Brooks, calmer but no less furious, leaned closer.
This isn't just about Tyler. It's about power. Do you know who sits on that board? Tyler's father has been one of their biggest donors for years. He's built influence brick by brick, and he'll use every stone to crush you.
Caleb lifted his head slowly. His voice was quiet, almost detached. So no matter what I do, they'll never let me win? Brooks placed a hand on his arm. No, Caleb. They'll never let you win their way. That's why you need to make your own. While Caleb sat in that room, the board met behind closed doors. The atmosphere inside was thick with tension. Tyler's father, Richard Crane, A man with a commanding presence and a reputation for ruthless advocacy leaned across the polished oak table. "This boy cannot stand. Do you understand?" His voice was low, deliberate. "If you validate his solution, you undermine this institution. You tell every donor, every alum, that our standards can be overturned by someone like him." One official hesitated. "But his work, by all appearances, it's correct." Crane's eyes hardened. "Correct doesn't matter. Control does. If you allow him to succeed, you'll have chaos, questions, scandals. Is that what you want splashed across the press?" The board members shifted uncomfortably. Money spoke louder than merit. And Richard Crane's money had built more than one wing of the institution. By the time the meeting ended, the verdict was clear. Caleb Johnson would not be allowed to stand unchallenged. The second half of the competition resumed, but the shadow over Caleb loomed heavier than ever. Contestants gave him sidelong glances, some pitying, others openly mocking. Tyler worked his problems with exaggerated calm, as though to demonstrate what a real competitor looked like. Caleb forced himself through the final rounds, his solutions neat and precise. But he knew it didn't matter. The board had already decided. As the last bell rang, signaling the end, the head judge once again took the microphone. Her expression was grave. "After review, we regret to inform you that due to statistical irregularities, Caleb Johnson's results are disqualified pending further investigation." The auditorium erupted. Some gasped, some applauded. Others immediately raised their phones to capture the moment. Denise shot out of her seat again. "You can't do this. You're destroying his future." Brooke stood too, her voice steady but sharp. "You're not disqualifying his work. You're disqualifying his existence." Security began moving toward them. The cameras turned, focusing not on Tyler's victory, but on Caleb's humiliation. On stage, Caleb sat frozen. He had known this was coming. But the sting of hearing it aloud, in front of thousands, still cut deep. "Mr. Johnson," one official said firmly, "please come with us." Caleb stood slowly. His legs felt like lead, but he forced himself upright. The audience watched, recording, whispering, judging. He could feel their eyes pierce through him, branding him not as a prodigy, but as a pariah. Denise tried to push past the guards. "Leave him alone. He did nothing wrong." One guard blocked her gently but firmly. Caleb met her eyes across the room. His mother's face was red with rage, her eyes wet with tears. For a brief moment, he almost broke. But then he straightened his shoulders. If they wanted to parade him out like a criminal, he wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing him crumble. As the guards escorted him off stage, flashes from cameras lit the hall. Reporters shouted questions. "Caleb, did you cheat? Do you have a response to the investigation? Are the rumors true?" He kept his head down, jaw clenched, saying nothing. The narrative was writing itself in real time. The boy genius turned fraud. The cheater exposed. And as Caleb was led through the side doors, Tyler Crane stood in the spotlight smiling for the cameras. Caleb is escorted out of the hall in front of live cameras, his reputation collapsing while the world swallows the cheater narrative whole. The image of Caleb being escorted out of the national championship hall, replayed endlessly on television screens and social media feeds. Cameras had captured every second, the bowed head, the security guards at his side, the flashing lights of reporters' cameras. Within hours, headlines were brutal. "Math prodigy" or "master fraud." Wildcard contestant removed amid irregularities. Cheater Johnson humiliated on national stage. For Caleb, it was suffocating. He barely spoke for days, locking himself in his room, the glow of his desk lamp, his only company. He filled notebooks with furious scribbles, as though proving himself on paper might undo what the world now believed. But outside those four walls, the narrative was already written, and none of it in his favor. Denise, however, refused to let her son be buried alive. She had always been the quiet worker, the woman who scrubbed floors until her knees ached, and smiled politely when supervisors dismissed her. But watching her son dragged across the national stage, as a villain flipped something inside her, the Denise who bowed her head to survive was gone. In her place stood a mother with fire in her chest and steel in her spine. The morning after the competition, Denise called in sick to both jobs. She opened her laptop at the kitchen table, the same table where she had once counted pennies to stretch rent money, and began sending emails. She wrote to reporters, demanding corrections to their coverage. She called civil rights organizations, her voice trembling at first but growing steadier with every word. She contacted education advocates, lawyers, anyone who might listen. My son is not a cheater, she said again and again. He is being targeted. They investigated him without cause, erased him from finals, and humiliated him in public. This isn't about irregularities. This is about race. Most responses were cautious, polite brush-offs. Some didn't reply at all, but a few asked questions. A few wanted details. Denise gave them everything. Dates, contests, names of officials. She documented every slight Caleb had endured at Westbrook High. The whispers, the removals, the investigations done in secrecy. Professor Brooks stood beside her through it all. The truth isn't enough, she reminded Denise. You'll need evidence. Something undeniable. They'll call you bitter, angry, exaggerate. But if you can prove conspiracy, if you can show this wasn't oversight, but intent, then you can shift the ground beneath them. Denise nodded, exhaustion lining her face but determination hardening her voice. Then I'll find it. The next week was a blur of interviews. Local reporters gathered outside the Johnson apartment, shoving microphones in Denise's face as she left for work. Mrs. Johnson, do you really believe the board targeted your son because of his race? What evidence do you have of this alleged bias? Isn't it possible Caleb simply made mistakes? Denise didn't flinch. Standing on the cracked pavement outside her building, she met their eyes and spoke clearly. My son has worked harder than anyone. He solved problems no one else could, and every time he rose, they pushed him back down. This isn't about mistakes. This is about a system that can't accept brilliance from a boy like him. Her words struck a nerve. Clips of her interviews spread across the internet. Some dismissed her as an angry single mother looking for excuses. But others began to question. Comment threads filled with debates. Had the board acted fairly, or had Caleb been railroaded? The pressure mounted. Civil rights lawyers reached out. One, a sharp-eyed woman named Attorney Valerie Stone, agreed to take Denise's case. If they investigated him without transparency, if they disqualified him without proof, that's discrimination. Stone said firmly, we just need the receipts. Denise threw herself into the search. She requested records from the school district, competition committees, and the national board. Most came back with vague denials or heavily redacted documents. Doors slammed in her face, but she didn't stop knocking. At night, when Caleb sat silent at his desk, Denise would stroke his hair gently. I'm fighting for you, baby, she whispered. Don't you give up on yourself. Caleb rarely answered, but sometimes she caught the faintest glimmer in his eyes, a fragile hope he dared not voice. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. One evening, as Denise sifted through yet another batch of official responses, her inbox pinged. The sender's name was hidden, the email address unfamiliar. She hesitated, fear prickling her skin, but when she opened it, her heart nearly stopped. Attached were a series of emails between board members and competition officials. The subject lines were damning: concerns about Johnson, protecting the integrity of the event, managing optics, and the words inside were worse. If Johnson is allowed to advance, donors will question our standards. We can't risk the optics of a wildcard outperforming Crane. Better to disqualify under suspicion than face embarrassment later. Denise's hands trembled as she scrolled. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept reading, each line confirming what she had known in her bones. Caleb had never been disqualified for irregularities. He had been targeted because the system was never built to let him win. Brooks read the emails over her shoulder, her jaw tightening. This is it, she whispered. This is the proof they thought you'd never find. Denise covered her mouth, sobs breaking free. For weeks she had been told she was imagining it. Overreacting, chasing ghosts. But here it was, undeniable evidence of conspiracy. Her tears dried quickly, replaced by resolve. She closed the laptop and turned to Brooks. They tried to erase my son, she said, her voice steady now, like iron. But I'm going to make sure the whole world sees exactly what they did. And at that moment, for the first time since the humiliation began, Denise felt power shift. Not much, but enough to know the fight was far from over. Denise uncovers damning emails proving the board conspired to block Caleb, evidence that could turn whispers of injustice into a firestorm. Denise sat frozen at the kitchen table, her laptop glowing in the dark apartment. The damning emails stared back at her, undeniable proof of what she had suspected all along. Caleb hadn't been disqualified for irregularities. He had been erased to protect Tyler Crane in the image of the board. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. This time, it was adrenaline, rage, a mother's fury, sharpened into purpose. Professor Brooks leaned over, reading the lines again. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed fire. These words, they thought they were safe, hidden behind closed doors. They underestimated you, Denise. They underestimated the power of truth. Denise nodded, her jaw set. They silenced my son in front of the world. Now the world will hear him through me. By morning, the emails were no longer just in Denise's inbox. Attorney Valerie Stone helped her prepare them carefully, redacting private identifiers but leaving the damning language untouched. Together, they sent the files to several trusted journalists, activists, and civil rights organizations. Within hours, the leak exploded across the internet. News alerts flashed. Leaked emails reveal bias in National Math Championship. Officials privately dismiss Black Prodigy. Cite donor optics. System rigged. Evidence shows Johnson targeted. Screenshots of the emails spread like wildfire across Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Hashtags surged. Injustice for Caleb. Math racism. Erase the bias. People who had mocked Caleb days earlier, now reconsidered. Outrage flooded timelines. Commentators on morning shows debated heatedly. This isn't about one boy, one activist declared on national television. This is about how institutions, academic, financial, cultural, are designed to exclude Black excellence whenever it threatens the status quo. Denise watched from the couch, tears in her eyes. For the first time since the nightmare began, people were seeing the truth. But Caleb, sitting beside her, shoulders hunched, didn't share her relief. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor. "They're not talking about me," he murmured. "They're talking about a symbol. I'm not a headline, I'm a person. And I still lost everything." Denise touched his hand. "Baby, this is just the beginning. You'll see." The fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours, 2 board officials resigned. One released a statement citing ethical concerns, though the language was vague, evasive. Public pressure mounted for others to step down. Richard Crane, Tyler's father, remained defiant. At a press conference, he called the leaks misinterpreted private correspondence, insisting they had been taken out of context. "Integrity must remain the cornerstone of our competitions," he declared, his voice polished, his suit immaculate. "This is about fairness, not race." But the cracks showed. His words rang hollow in the face of undeniable text. Better to disqualify under suspicion than face embarrassment later. Protests erupted outside the board's headquarters. Students held signs, "Numbers don't discriminate. People do." Others carried Caleb's picture, his solemn eyes staring back as a reminder of the boy turned into collateral damage. Reporters camped outside Westbrook High, demanding comments from administrators. Some staff dodged questions. Others avoided the building altogether. Teachers who had once sided with Tyler now avoided his gaze in the hallways. And yet, despite the outrage, Caleb's reinstatement never came. The board released a statement late in the week. "While we acknowledge the inappropriate language in certain internal communications, we stand by the integrity of our competition process. At this time, the results of the National Mathematics Championship will remain unchanged." The words landed like a slap. Denise read them aloud, her voice breaking. "They admitted what they did, and they're still leaving you out." Brooks shook her head bitterly. "This is what systems do. They sacrifice individuals for survival. They'll give up a few officials to protect the structure. But admitting Caleb was wronged, that would unravel the whole thing." Caleb sat silent, staring at the statement again and again. A hollow ache filled his chest. It wasn't enough for the truth to be known. The system refused to make it right. Tyler, meanwhile, continued his rise. Despite the scandal swirling, he appeared in glossy photos from the finals, smiling with his medal, the caption beneath reading, "National Champion, Tyler Crane." For Caleb, the sight was unbearable. To the world, Tyler was still the victor. To the system, Caleb was still erased. He shoved the newspaper aside, his voice low. "They'll always believe him. Not me. Even with proof." Denise reached for him. "Baby." But Caleb pulled away, frustration boiling over. "You don't get it, Mama. They can leak all the emails they want. But I'm still not on that stage. I'm still not the champion. I'm still nothing." The words cut Denise to her core. She wanted to scream, to demand the world see him, as she did. A boy whose genius lit the dark. But she knew he wasn't wrong. Public sympathy didn't erase humiliation. Outrage didn't restore stolen victories. That night, as protests raged downtown, Denise stood at the apartment window, watching the city lights flicker. She whispered to herself, half prayer, half vow, "They may have stolen his medal, but they won't steal his future." Behind her, Brooks spoke quietly. "The fight isn't over. Outrage is only the first wave. Change comes when outrage turns into action. Caleb may not see it yet, but this firestorm, he lit it. Whether he wants to be or not, he's become the proof they can't ignore." Denise turned, tears in her eyes. "Then how do we keep it burning?" Brooks's gaze was firm. "By refusing to let them write the ending." Days later, as the finals proceeded without him, Caleb sat alone at his desk, flipping through a notebook. He traced the equations with his finger, each symbol a reminder of what he had achieved, of what no one could take from him. But outside his window, cheers erupted from televisions across the city. As Tyler Crane was crowned champion, the cameras showed him holding the trophy aloft, confetti raining down, his family beaming at his side. The world saw a hero. Caleb saw a thief wearing the crown of his silence. He closed his notebook sharply, the sound echoing in the quiet room. His jaw tightened. "They took the finals from me," he whispered to himself. "But they haven't seen the last of me." And at that moment, the boy who had once only wanted recognition began to transform into something else entirely. Someone who no longer sought validation, but justice. The world knows the truth. Outrage grows. Officials resign. But the board refuses to reinstate Caleb. And the finals crown Tyler Crane instead. Caleb's genius is undeniable, yet he remains erased. The night after the finals, the Johnson apartment was quieter than it had ever been. The television had been left on, but muted, its screen replaying images of Tyler Crane holding the championship trophy, his smile stretched wide beneath a rain of golden confetti. Denise sat on the couch, her arms folded, her eyes fixed on the screen, though she couldn't bear to watch. Caleb was at his desk, hunched over yet another notebook, his pen moving furiously. He wasn't writing equations with his usual precision. The lines were jagged, uneven, as if his frustration bled onto the page. Professor Eleanor Brooks sat across from him. Unlike Denise, she didn't watch the television. She watched Caleb. She had seen the fire in Prodigies before, the way brilliance could burn brighter after injustice. But she had also seen it consume. "Caleb," she said softly, "stop for a moment." His pen kept scratching. "I can't. If I stop, I'll hear them again." The whispers. The word fraud. Brooks leaned forward. "You can drown out whispers with silence. You can't drown them out by running yourself into the ground." He slammed the pen down, his chest rising and falling. "Then what am I supposed to do? They stole everything. They admitted they sabotaged me, and they still gave him the trophy. What's left for me?" Brooks's gaze softened. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when the fight turned inward, when anger became despair. She sat back in her chair, her voice low, steady. "You think you're the first, Caleb? You think you're the only one who's ever been denied because of what you look like?" Caleb looked up, startled by the sharpness in her tone. "When I was 19, Brooks began, I stood in front of a lecture hall at my university. I had solved a theorem my professor had struggled with for months. My classmates applauded, some even gasped. But the professor? He told me I must have copied it, that someone must have slipped me the solution. He called me a liar in front of 200 students, and that moment followed me for years." Denise turned, her face tight with sorrow. Caleb said nothing, only listening, the fire in his chest flickering. Brooks continued, her voice quiet but sharp. "Every grant I applied for, every job I interviewed for, there was always suspicion. Not because my work was flawed, but because they couldn't imagine a black woman breaking ground where white men had not. They took stages from me, Caleb. They took recognition, awards, opportunities. They thought they were taking my future." She leaned forward, her eyes piercing into his. "But do you know what they couldn't take? The math itself. The theorems. The proofs. The brilliance. That lived with me, whether they applauded or not." Caleb swallowed hard. "But you didn't change the system." "No," Brooks admitted, her eyes glistening. "But I survived it, and I built my legacy anyway. Students I taught, papers I published, minds I touched. They never erased that. And now I'm here to make sure they don't erase you." Caleb looked down at his jagged notes. "It's not enough to survive. I want them to see me." Brooks's voice softened. Then stop waiting for permission to be seen. The room fell into silence. Denise's eyes brimmed with tears, but her lips curved into the faintest nod. Finally, Caleb asked, "What do I do?" Brooks leaned back, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, a small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "They can take away your stage," she said, "but not your genius." Caleb frowned. "What does that mean?" Brooks glanced at the television, where Tyler's victory replayed yet again. "The world thinks the finals are over, but the hardest problem, the one they saved for the championship round, hasn't been solved. Not truly, not cleanly." The cameras caught half-baked attempts, scribbles, but no breakthrough. Caleb's brow furrowed. So Brooks said, her voice firm. "Solve it. Not on their stage. Not in their time. Do it from here. From the sidelines. Let the world see that the boy they called a fraud cracked what their champion couldn't." Denise's eyes widened. "Eleanor, are you saying—" "Yes," Brooks interrupted. Her voice grew urgent. "Think about it. If Caleb solves that problem, if he produces a method no one else could, the narrative changes. He won't just be a boy denied. He'll be the boy who triumphed anyway." Caleb stared at her, his heart pounding. "But they'll say I cheated again, that I had more time, more resources." Brooks leaned forward, her voice like steel. "Then show them something they can't deny. Show them a method so original, so undeniable, that even your enemies can't call it fake. Do what they never expected. Outshine the system from the outside." The challenge hung in the air like a spark waiting for flame. Caleb's hands trembled. Fear and excitement twisted together in his chest. "If I fail—" "You won't," Brooks cut in, her voice steady. "And even if you did, failing while daring is better than suffocating in silence." Denise looked between them, torn between fear for her son and awe at the fire returning to his eyes. "Caleb, baby, if you do this, the whole world will be watching." Caleb finally lifted his gaze, his eyes steady now. "Good. Then let them watch." Professor Brooks challenges Caleb to do the unthinkable. Solve the unsolved final problem from the sidelines, outside the stage that rejected him. The idea haunted Caleb through the night. Brooks's challenge was simple in words, but monumental in weight. Solve the unsolved problem from the sidelines. As dawn broke, he sat by his desk, staring at the crumpled contest program, where the final problem was printed. The equations glared back at him, like a dare. For hours, he simply stared, pen in hand, unable to write a single line. Fear pressed on him. Fear that if he tried and failed, it would prove his critics right. But then he remembered Brooks's words. "They can take away your stage, but not your genius." And Denise's voice, trembling but fierce. "Don't you give up on yourself." Caleb's hand steadied. He wrote the first line. The following evening, the National Championship Awards ceremony filled the grand hall. Tyler Crane stood front and center, his medal glinting under the bright stage lights. The room pulsed with applause, cameras flashing, officials congratulating themselves on another successful event. Caleb sat with Denise and Brooks in the audience, far from the stage that should have been his. His presence drew a few curious looks, a few sneers, but most ignored him. His scandal had been swallowed into the noise of ceremony. But on his lap rested a simple notebook, and in his pocket, a pen. Brooks leaned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "It doesn't matter if no one announces you. Just begin." Denise squeezed his hand nervously. "Baby, if you're going to do this, don't look up. Don't listen. Just write." Caleb nodded. He flipped open the notebook and set the pen to the page. The first symbols appeared slowly, deliberately. A few people nearby noticed, glancing curiously, then dismissing him as a boy scribbling nervously. But as the lines grew, as the equations linked seamlessly together, those same people leaned in again, their eyes widening. "Wait," one man whispered to his neighbor. He's working on the final problem." The neighbor scoffed. "Impossible. That thing stumped everyone." But Caleb's pen didn't falter. His body leaned forward, every stroke purposeful. His mind locked into the rhythm he had honed in countless nights at his desk. Around him, whispers spread like ripples. "Is that—"
No, no way.
"He's actually doing it." Brooks sat straight-backed, her eyes fixed on his hand. Denise's heart pounded so loud she thought the whole auditorium could hear it. Minutes ticked by. Tyler Crane finished his victory speech, thanking his parents, his school, the board. Cameras flashed as he waved the medal. But in the shadows of the audience, another story was unfolding. Quieter, yet infinitely more powerful. Caleb turned a page, his hand moving faster now. The pieces were falling into place. Patterns emerged, connections linking effortlessly. He wasn't solving it their way. He was solving it his way. Gasps grew louder from those who had drawn close enough to glimpse his notebook. A young competitor seated nearby clutched his own paper, eyes wide. "He's doing it," he whispered. "Line by line, he's actually doing it." The murmur spread across the rows, competing with the ceremony on stage. Officials glanced uneasily toward the growing commotion. On stage, Tyler noticed too. His smile faltered for the briefest second as he spotted Caleb bent over his notebook, surrounded by whispers. His jaw tightened, his grip on the metal firmer. Caleb didn't see, he didn't hear. The world around him faded, until only the problem remained. His pen raced, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of thought. Each stroke was defiance. Each line was proof. Finally, after what felt like both an eternity and a single breath, he stopped. His pen fell from his hand. The notebook lay open. A clean, elegant solution sprawled across its pages. Not rushed, not messy, perfect. The people around him stared, their mouths open. A woman in the row ahead turned fully around. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He solved it. He actually solved it." The whispers became gasps, then exclamations. "He cracked it. Check his work. Look at it. This changes everything." Brooks allowed herself a small smile, her eyes shining. Denise pressed her hands to her mouth, tears welling. But Caleb sat still, his face calm, almost serene. He wasn't waiting for applause. He wasn't waiting for permission. For the first time, he wasn't waiting for anyone. And yet someone was watching. At the far edge of the row, a journalist named Maya Torres, who had been covering the event, had noticed the commotion. She slipped out her phone, angling it discreetly toward Caleb's notebook. The camera captured every line, every stroke of his final proof. Her breath caught as she watched. She whispered to herself, "This is the story, not that medal." Without hesitation, she hit record. On stage, officials tried to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen," one announced into the microphone, his voice forced and cheerful, "let's return our attention to our champion, Tyler Crane." But the crowd's attention was already fracturing. People pointed toward Caleb. Some leaned over seats for a better view. The tension in the room shifted palpably, as if everyone sensed the balance of truth tipping. Tyler's smile faltered again. He gripped the microphone, his voice louder, sharper. "I'm honored to be this year's champion," he declared, "and I think we should all remember, success comes to those who play fair." The words were pointed, his eyes darting toward Caleb. But this time, the whisper of fraud didn't echo. Instead, the murmurs carried a different word: genius. By the time the ceremony ended, Caleb closed his notebook and tucked it under his arm. He rose quietly, his mother and Brooks at his side. No officials acknowledged him, no cameras turned in his direction. But the buzz followed him out of the hall, whispers chasing him like shadows. And behind them, in Maya Torres's hands, the recording of his proof began uploading to her channel. The title she typed was simple: "The boy they called a fraud just solved the impossible problem." A journalist secretly records Caleb's live solution and uploads it online, about to set off a viral firestorm that will change everything. When Maya Torres pressed upload, she wasn't sure what would happen. She had covered dozens of academic events, most of them dull, predictable ceremonies where medals changed hands and photographs captured fleeting smiles. But the footage she had just recorded was different. It wasn't simply a boy writing on paper, it was defiance captured in ink, genius unfolding line by line, live in front of doubters who had erased him. By the time Caleb, Denise and Professor Brooks walked out of the auditorium, the video had already begun to spread. It started small. A few of Maya's followers, teachers, academics, students, clicked play. They expected to see another exposé about the controversy surrounding Caleb Johnson. Instead, they saw him, seated in the shadows of the audience, working silently, surrounded by whispers. They saw the impossible problem dissolve beneath his pen. The comments came quickly. "Wait, is this real? Someone check his work. This looks legit. I thought this kid was a fraud. How is he doing this?" By the next morning, the video had crossed 50,000 views, then 100,000, then 1 million. Twitter exploded with debates. Clips circulated on TikTok with captions. The kid they called a cheater just blew everyone away. Instagram Reels highlighted the gasps of those who had witnessed him live. The hashtags that once mocked him, Fraud Johnson, Fake Genius, were drowned out by new ones. Justice for Caleb, Numbers Don't Lie, Prodigy Proven. Mathematicians began weighing in. Dr. Anika Sharma, a renowned professor at MIT, tweeted, "Just reviewed Caleb Johnson's solution. Elegant, original, brilliant. The method he used is unlike anything I've seen from competitors. This young man is the real deal." Others followed. Professors from Stanford, Princeton, Oxford, scholars who had no stake in American high school competitions, publicly confirmed that Caleb's proof wasn't just correct, it was groundbreaking. On one livestream, Dr. Emmanuel Karanja, a Kenyan mathematician known for his contributions to number theory, shook his head in awe. "This boy has done in minutes what some of my graduate students struggle to do in weeks. His method, it's not standard, it's his own. That's what makes it extraordinary." The tide was turning. Denise watched the numbers climb from her phone at the kitchen table, tears running down her cheeks. She called Caleb into the room. "Baby, look," she whispered, handing him the screen. "They're seeing you, the real you." Caleb hesitated before taking the phone. His heart pounded as he scrolled through thousands of comments, most from strangers who had once mocked him. Now their words told a different story. "I feel ashamed for doubting him. This kid is the definition of genius. Racism tried to bury him. He just broke through." For the first time in weeks, Caleb let out a breath that wasn't heavy with despair. He didn't smile. He wasn't ready, but the tightness in his chest eased. Brooke stood in the doorway, watching. Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. "The world has a short memory for rumors, but it has a long memory for truth. And this, Caleb, this is true." But with recognition came resistance. The competition board scrambled as the video dominated headlines. Anonymous staff members leaked whispers of panic from inside, heated arguments, late-night phone calls, donors demanding explanations. Richard Crane, Tyler's father, doubled down on his defense. On a televised interview, he sneered at the viral proof. "Of course it looks impressive, but without controlled conditions, how can we trust it? For all we know, Caleb had access to resources, or time the other competitors didn't." His words backfired. Viewers flooded social media with rebuttals, pointing out that Caleb had solved the problem live, in the middle of the awards ceremony, in plain sight. One viral tweet summed it up. Tyler needed a medal. Caleb needed only a notebook. Tyler himself couldn't hide his frustration. Students filmed him at school as he shoved away reporters, his usually polished grin cracking into scowls. In one leaked video, he muttered, "He'll always be a fraud. You can't prove authenticity with a YouTube clip." But the internet had already decided otherwise. Within a week, Caleb's face was everywhere. News anchors replayed clips of his solution. Scholars broke down his method on whiteboards during primetime segments, and activists used his story as a rallying cry for systemic reform in education. Protesters outside the board's headquarters now carried signs not only with Caleb's name, but with his equations printed in bold ink. One banner read, "You can erase his name, but not his work." Denise joined a demonstration downtown. When reporters asked her how she felt, she held her head high. "My son doesn't need your medal," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "He proved himself on his own terms, but I will not stop until this board admits what they did to him, and to every child they've ever dismissed." Her words echoed across networks, amplifying the firestorm. Caleb, however, remained cautious. Fame was never what he wanted. At night he still sat with his notebooks, continuing to write, continuing to prove, not to the world, but to himself, that his gift was real. Brooke sat beside him one evening, watching him work. "Do you see now?" she asked. "They can smear your name. They can strip your title. But they cannot erase brilliance. The world has finally seen you. Not because they allowed it. Because you refused to disappear." Caleb nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the page. "But if they saw me, then why am I still out here? Why am I not on that stage?" Brooks didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked toward the television, where a breaking news banner crawled across the bottom of the screen. "Competition board under fire as Caleb Johnson video goes viral. Officials silent amid growing pressure." Denise entered the room just as the anchor continued. "Public outrage has reached unprecedented levels. Several lawmakers are now calling for accountability. Sources say the board will address the controversy in an emergency press conference tomorrow morning. The room went still. Caleb's pen dropped from his hand. An emergency press conference, Denise whispered. Brooks's eyes narrowed. They're cornered. They've tried silence. They've tried denial. And now they're out of options. Caleb swallowed hard, his stomach churning. Tomorrow the board would be forced to speak his name again, but would they vindicate him, or destroy him all over? As the viral video proves Caleb's genius, and the world rallies behind him, the competition board is forced into an emergency press conference, one that could either clear his name or bury him permanently. The morning of the emergency press conference, the nation held its breath. Reporters crowded the steps of the National Mathematics Competition's headquarters, their microphones raised like weapons, their cameras aimed at the podium where the board would finally break its silence. Inside the Johnson apartment, Caleb sat at the kitchen table, his notebook closed for once. Denise paced the room, unable to stop wringing her hands. Brooks sat calmly, but her sharp eyes betrayed her tension. The television flickered with live coverage. When the board members filed onto the stage, the sight alone made Denise's chest tighten. They looked polished, confident, rehearsed men and women who had buried her son's dream with a few cold words. At the center stood Richard Crane, Tyler's father, his jaw set as though daring the world to challenge him. The head chairwoman, Miss Wexler, stepped to the microphone. After thorough review of recent events, she began, her voice measured. We must acknowledge that the viral footage of Caleb Johnson solving the championship's final problem has been verified by multiple independent experts. His method is both original and correct. The room erupted. Reporters shouted over one another. On the screen, Denise gasped. They admitted it, she whispered, tears springing to her eyes. Caleb, however, sat still. His face was unreadable. Wexler continued. Therefore, we officially recognize Caleb Johnson as the rightful winner of this year's National Mathematics Championship. Applause broke out, not from the board, but from the audience of reporters and protesters outside. The cameras caught it all. A boy once branded a fraud, now vindicated in front of the world. But even as the announcement spread across televisions and phones, Wexler's tone shifted. We regret the unfortunate language revealed in leaked communications, she said smoothly. But we reaffirm our commitment to fairness. Moving forward, new oversight measures will be implemented to prevent misunderstandings of this kind. The word misunderstandings hung like an insult. They had stolen his stage, humiliated him before millions, and now they brushed it off as a minor error in wording. Denise's relief hardened into anger. Misunderstandings? She muttered. They nearly broke him. They nearly broke us. Brooks's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed. This is how institutions survive. They give you the victory, but never the apology. The following days blurred into chaos. News outlets replayed the press conference non-stop, highlighting the dramatic reversal. Social media celebrated Caleb's vindication, hailing him as a symbol of perseverance. His name trended globally. Universities began calling. MIT, Princeton, Stanford. Letters of interest poured in, not just from math programs but from think tanks, scholarship foundations, even corporations eager to attach themselves to his brilliance. Strangers mailed letters to the Johnson apartment. Some wrote apologies for ever doubting him. Others begged him to keep inspiring kids like theirs. Children sent crayon drawings of calculators with hearts around them. Caleb accepted it all quietly, but inside he felt a hollowness he couldn't shake. Because for every letter, every scholarship offer, every message of support, he remembered the silence in the auditorium when he was accused. He remembered the laughter in the hallways, the hashtags, the memes. He remembered being escorted out of the competition like a criminal, while cameras flashed. Vindication could not erase humiliation. One evening, after another stack of scholarship letters arrived, Caleb sat at the table, staring at them without touching. Denise placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Baby, look at this," she whispered, her voice trembling with pride. "They're fighting to have you. All of them. They finally see you." Caleb shook his head. His voice was quiet, almost pained. "No, Mama. They don't see me. They see a headline. They see a way to save face. If they really saw me, they wouldn't have let this happen in the first place." Denise's chest ached. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that justice, however delayed, was still justice. But as she looked into his tired eyes, she realized he was right. They hadn't given him recognition because they believed in him. They had given it because the world had forced them to. Later that night, as she folded laundry, Denise found herself whispering to the empty room. They almost stole his dream. If I hadn't fought, if Brooks hadn't pushed him, they would have buried him alive. Her voice broke. And how many other mothers' children never get pulled back out? For Brooks, the vindication was bittersweet too. She had lived Caleb's pain, decades earlier, and never received an apology, never stood on a podium with recognition. Watching him now was both triumph and reminder of wounds that had never fully healed. Sitting across from him, she spoke gently. Caleb, I told you they could take your stage, but not your genius. That's still true, but you need to decide what comes next. Do you accept their validation, or do you build something bigger than their approval? Caleb looked at her, torn. If I join their system, am I just helping it survive? Brooks's eyes glistened. Only you can answer that. The offers kept coming. Full scholarships, research opportunities, speaking engagements. Caleb's name had become a symbol of resilience, and institutions wanted to bask in his light. One night, an official representative from MIT called directly. Denise answered, her voice trembling as she handed the phone to her son. Caleb, the voice on the line said warmly, we've followed your journey. We want to offer you a place here, with full funding and access to resources you deserve. Caleb held the phone in silence, his chest heavy. Finally, he said softly, I'll think about it. When he hung up, Denise stared at him, incredulous. Think about it? Baby, this is MIT. This is everything you dreamed of. Caleb looked down at his notebook. His voice was barely above a whisper. But what if their stage was never meant for me in the first place? The room went quiet. Denise froze, her eyes filling with fear. Brooks closed her notebook slowly, her gaze sharp but unreadable. Caleb is recognized as the rightful winner and flooded with opportunities, but instead of celebrating, he hesitates, questioning whether he should step into the very system that tried to erase him. Years passed. The controversy that once consumed headlines eventually faded, as all storms do. The viral video, the leaked emails, the emergency press conference, those moments lived on in archives and documentaries, replayed whenever the subject of racism in education surfaced. But for Caleb Johnson, the boy once branded a fraud, life became less about fighting for recognition and more about building something lasting. He had turned down several of the elite institutions that courted him, after his vindication. Denise never forgot the night he slid a thick envelope from MIT back across the kitchen table. His voice calm but resolute. They didn't believe me when I was alone. He had said, I don't want their stage now that the world is watching. I'll build my own. It broke Denise's heart to see him walk away from the dream he had chased since boyhood. But she came to understand that it wasn't rejection. It was reclamation. Caleb wasn't turning his back on opportunity. He was turning his back on the system that had tried to erase him. Instead, he went home, not just to their apartment but to the community that had raised him, doubted him, and shaped him. Now, years later, the boy Prodigy was a man in his 20s. His hair was longer, his frame leaner, his eyes sharper from the battles he had endured. But he was no longer hunched in isolation over scrap paper by a dim desk lamp. He now stood tall in front of a chalkboard in a modest classroom inside the East Side Community Center. The room was full of children, black, brown, and white, each clutching notebooks, their faces a mixture of curiosity and excitement. They weren't there because of medals or trophies. They were there because of him. Caleb picked up a piece of chalk, the faint dust clinging to his fingers. He turned to the board and wrote in clean, deliberate strokes. They doubted me, but numbers never did. The children read it aloud, in unison, their voices rising like a chorus. Caleb smiled, not the nervous smile of a boy seeking approval, but the calm smile of a man who had nothing left to prove. Do you know why I wrote that? He asked. Hands shot up. A girl in the front row answered. Because numbers can't lie. They don't care who you are. Caleb nodded. Exactly. Numbers don't care what you look like, where you come from, or what people say about you. They only care about truth. And when you learn to see that truth, no one can take it from you. The room fell quiet, the children hanging on his words. He continued, his voice steady, carrying the weight of his past without bitterness. When I was your age, people told me I didn't belong in math. They said kids like me couldn't be geniuses. And when I proved them wrong, they tried to erase me. They called me a cheater. They dragged my name through the mud. But do you know what saved me? A boy in the back whispered. The numbers? Caleb smiled. The numbers. Every night, when the world doubted me, The numbers reminded me that I was right, and they will do the same for you. Denise sometimes sat quietly in the back of the classroom, watching him teach. Her hair had grayed. Her hands bore the years of labor, but her eyes gleamed with pride. She remembered every sleepless night, every whispered prayer, every moment she feared the system would crush her son. Now, seeing him transform that pain into power for the next generation, she finally allowed herself to breathe. Brooks, older now and walking with more difficulty, still visited often. She would sit near the front, her cane resting against her chair, smiling faintly, as Caleb guided the children through problems with patience and creativity. Once, when a particularly difficult equation stumped the class, she leaned over to Denise and whispered, "He's teaching them more than math. He's teaching them how to fight back with brilliance." Denise squeezed her hand. "He's teaching them how to survive." But even as Caleb built this new legacy, the scars remained. Some nights, after the children left, and the chalkboard was clean, he sat alone in the classroom, staring at the empty desks. The silence brought back memories he couldn't quite bury. The auditorium's whispers, the humiliation of being escorted out under flashing cameras, the word fraud echoing in his mind, the recognition, the apologies, the press conference. None of it had erased the wound. Justice had come, but late, and the delay had left marks. Yet instead of running from those scars, Caleb carried them openly. They reminded him that the fight wasn't just his. It was generational. One afternoon, after class, a boy lingered behind. He was small, shy, his backpack nearly bigger than his frame. "Mr. Johnson?" he asked timidly. Caleb knelt to his level. "Yeah?" The boy's eyes darted to the floor. "My teacher says, people like me don't usually get into advanced math. She says maybe I should focus on something else." The words hit Caleb like a knife to the chest. For a moment he saw his younger self, sitting in classrooms where teachers told him the same thing. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Listen to me. Don't you ever let anyone tell you where you don't belong. Math isn't about them. It's about you. And if you love it, then you belong more than anyone." The boy's eyes lifted slowly, a spark of hope flickering there. Caleb smiled and tapped the side of his head. "Remember, numbers don't lie." The boy nodded and hurried out, clutching his notebook tightly. Caleb stood, his chest heavy but proud. Another child had been saved from the same trap he once nearly fell into. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the east side, Caleb stayed behind in the classroom, staring at the chalkboard. His own words still stood there, bold and white. "They doubted me, but numbers never did." He whispered to himself, almost like a prayer, "And they never will." The camera of history pulled back then, beyond the walls of that classroom, beyond Caleb's quiet redemption, and into the wider world where countless other prodigies still sat at desks, their brilliance doubted, their dreams threatened by bias too familiar. The narrator's voice, steady and unflinching, asked the question that lingered long after Caleb's story ended. Caleb Johnson proved his genius could not be erased. But how many others remain silenced by racism today? Children whose brilliance will never be seen, because the system still refuses to believe in them. The screen faded to black, leaving the weight of that question heavy in the air. Caleb redeems his pain by teaching the next generation. But the narrator's question lingers. How many more prodigies are being silenced by racism right now? They tried to bury his brilliance, but the truth rose anyway. How many more voices are still being silenced right now? If you believe every child deserves to be seen, type yes in the comments, and subscribe if this story broke your heart.